My name is Rafik Naibrook. I'm a scientist with CIAT, based here in Nairobi. Welcome to this session on social inclusion, equity and rights in the context of restoration. And we will be sharing some lessons learned from the field. This is my third GLF event. It's quite exciting that it's happening in Nairobi this time. The last couple of ones were in Bonn and Washington, DC. And there was one in Bonn where I remember the moderator asked the audience if you can just show a hand if you're part of government. Can I see anybody who is part of representing government? Researchers, scientists, or technical institutions part of implementation? All right, are there any students? Are there any farmers? Welcome, karibu. Any donors? Great. And the last question, who thinks it is colder than they expected it to be today? Okay, I'm one of them, obviously, as you can see how I've been dressed. So we have an exciting panel. We're going to have three case studies presented with an interviewer-interviewee format. Afterwards, we will have a panel with three panelists where we will take it from the context to higher level. The case studies are part of a series of case studies that we've published. The information briefs are in the back there. They were published with the support of GLF and C4, and three of the case studies that you can pick up from the back will be discussed today. And to get started, I want to hand the mic to Marlene Elias, the gender lead at Biodiversity International, to set the scene, sets the stage of the discussion that we'll be having. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ravik. Nice to see everyone here today. And I'm very glad to have a few minutes to set the scene for how gender equality, social inclusion, rights relate to restoration. And we saw some very beautiful examples this morning in some of the sessions, so I will be building on that and also drawing on this framework, which is available online if anyone's interested in having a closer look at a later point in time. So we know that despite our efforts, a lot is still not happening the way it needs to with regards to social inclusion in restoration initiatives. So many initiatives are actually reinforcing marginalization and inequality rather than challenging them. And we can do better. We know we can do better, but to do that we have to be critically reflexive. We have to be honest about our experiences and our practices. And that starts by asking who sets the global agenda for restoration, where that agenda frames what occurs at the national levels. So how democratic is that international space? To what extent are local people actually able to contribute, to influence initiatives that directly affect them? And when they are engaged, who exactly is engaged? So we know that within any community there's a great deal of social differentiation based on gender, on age and generation, on ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and so on. So who is actually engaged? Who isn't engaged? And how does that influence the costs and benefits of restoration and the distribution of these costs and benefits? So gender and social inclusion relate to restoration in many different ways. Of course, restoration occurs in places, and there are choices that need to be made about which lands are going to be restored, which lands will receive investments, financial investments, technical investments in terms of the restoration. And a number of maps have been made based on remote sensing data that show that there are billions of hectares of land that are potentially suitable for restoration globally. But the identification of suitable lands can also be very problematic when it occurs in this way. So the problem is that it often assumes that there are lands that are idle or that are underutilized or barren, and that are conceptualized then as being unused, when in reality we know that there are very few lands that are unused, even lands that appear very degraded and that may not be formally titled to communities often serve for foraging, for grazing, for collecting non-timber forest products. And many different actors can lay claims to land, the same land, for different purposes or for the same purposes, and so there are also overlapping claims to land. And identifying lands for restoration without understanding land use histories, without understanding these claims, can be very problematic. So it can, of course, exclude local people from existing land uses, and it can undermine their rights, and particularly the rights of marginalized groups and of women who rarely hold formal titles to those lands, but who are often most dependent on them. So we need to build in safeguards, we need to build in grievance mechanisms to protect the rights of various user groups and land users. And there's an incentive side to that as well. So insecure access to land and to trees can limit the ability and the interest to plant and to manage trees. And on the flip side, enhanced security of tenure and security to the benefits from restoration can increase the likelihood of engaging in restoration. Gender also matters for restoration because, well, restoration is not new. Rural women and men have been restoring, have been managing lands for many, many centuries, managing the succession of species, selectively maintaining or planting trees which hold value to them, those that offer them important ecosystem services, and both women and men can inform restoration practices with their local knowledge if they're adequately engaged to do that. And gender also matters for restoration because it can influence priorities for restoration objectives, for location, so which lands should be restored, which approaches should be used in the restoration process, which species should be retained, which ecosystem services should be sought. But because women and men have different roles, different responsibilities with respect to environmental management, to livelihoods, because they have different access to resources and to lands, they often have different priorities for restoration. And they also may prefer different types of benefits from restoration. So, for example, benefits like cash transfers, income generating opportunities, tenure security, ecosystem services, and so on. And so social inclusion matters for determining what those benefits, who's going to determine what those benefits should be, and who's going to determine how those costs, the costs and the benefits of restoration are going to be distributed. Because rural women in most parts of the world tend to control fewer resources and less land than rural men, benefit schemes that are based on relative contributions of land to restoration will tend to disadvantage women and, of course, landless households as well. So there are a number of examples of initiatives that have mobilized women to plant trees, for example, where when the trees matured, men were the ones who could actually access and reap the benefits because they were the landowners. So these types of inequalities can be reinforced or they can be challenged through our work. So to sum up, gender equality, social inclusion need to be addressed in restoration initiatives to safeguard the rights of local land users and also to challenge inequalities in decision-making, in the distribution of costs and benefits from restoration, and also to incentivize women and men to contribute to restoration efforts that can provide them with greater opportunities and improved livelihoods. So these are some of the issues we'd like to discuss today, grounding them in very practical experiences. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Ravik.
Thank you, Marlene. So now from that theoretical framework with some examples that Marlene just gave, we want to really situate it and contextualize it with some real examples from people who are in the field working in these cases. We'll have 3 cases. Can you quickly go back to the previous slide? The first one on Komaza, the second on the Nairobi waterfront, and the third on agroforestry. For full disclosure, I want to also say that as a member, as a scientist at the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, CIAT, I sit on the board of the Nairobi waterfront, so I'm quite aware of the whole implementation of the project, but we're letting 2 of my colleagues are going to do the interviewing and interrogating. So I'll start with Komaza, and we have about 5 minutes for presentation of the case, 5 minutes of interrogation, and then we want to open it up for at least 1 or 2 questions from the audience to clarify any issues. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ross Conroy. I'm the Senior Field Operations Associate at Komaza. I'd like to start just with a brief overview of what Komaza is. Komaza is a social enterprise that engages smallholder farmers in an innovative outgrower model to grow micro woodlots. So these are woodlots of about a half acre to an acre in size. We operate on the coast of Kenya in Kilifi and Kwale counties, and we work currently with 14,000 farmers. That represents 3,800 hectares of woodlots that we've grown, and over 3 million trees. So it's our belief that smallholder farmers, as it says behind me, are the future of African forestry, and that by unlocking their potential, we can deliver social impact, we can deliver environmental impact and restoration, and we can also grow a sustainable business. So in this partnership, farmers are providing the land, farmers are providing labor, farmers are providing security for the trees, and Komaza is providing the inputs needed, so that includes seedlings that we produce at our nursery. We're also providing trainings on how to plant and maintain the trees throughout the lifetime of the partnership. We're also providing harvesting services, a guaranteed market, so we're kind of capturing the whole value chain in there. At the end, at harvest, at the end of this partnership, farmers are paid for the trees that were grown on their land. This payment, which we estimate at final harvest is about $800 to $1,600 US, represents a significant increase from normal income levels for many of the farmers with whom we work, who are often earning less than $1.90 a day. We estimate this to be about a 30 to 50% increase in cash earned over that time period. Farmers can then use that money however they so choose. That could be for investing in education, that could be for investing in livestock, that could be for starting small businesses. And these are all examples of things that we've seen our farmers do with the money that's been earned. So a key component of our business model is serving our customers, our partners, and these are the farmers with whom we work. Over 50% of these farmers are women, and so we have to carefully consider that we're serving these women and so that they're reaping the same benefits as men would in the same partnership. In a context which is traditionally very patriarchal, where land tenure rights are dominated by men, this becomes particularly important. And what we've done and what we've introduced in the last year is paying farmers directly for the work that they're doing, so the enrolled farmer who engages in the project, rather than paying the landowner. So we're also doing this by paying women directly through mobile money systems. So I'm sure for anyone who's spent an amount of time in Kenya, you're familiar with M-Pesa. Mobile money is somewhat of a new idea in a lot of places in the world, but has a long history in Kenya. So we're actually paying farmers at final harvest directly to the numbers that they provide to ensure that money is going to the proper recipient. So I think there's still a lot of questions that we have. There's still a lot of stuff that we want to dig into, and I hope that this discussion reveals a lot of that. We want to understand a little bit better the dynamics behind SIM card ownership and control within families. If a family has one SIM card, for example, how does that dictate the control of those finances once they come in? And we also want to better understand what farmers are doing with the money that's earned so that we can help them to deliver the maximum social impact available. And one of the ways that we're really interested in exploring this in the future is by creating linkages with other organizations. So we've learned over the 10 years that we've been operating that you have to be focused and specialized on one thing to do it very, very well. And that's what we're focusing on, is this outgrow model where we can produce small woodlots with these farmers for a cost that represents a significant decrease from traditional plantation farming. But at the same time, we want to include these issues of gender, these issues of empowerment and social inclusion. But we're really interested in exploring how linkages with other organizations, for example, organizations that could provide financial services or financial literacy training, could further improve the impact by creating more of a holistic approach. So that's just it for my brief introduction, but I'm really looking forward to getting into some of these questions, both from this interview panel and your own questions. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Natalie Elwell. I'm the Senior Gender Advisor with World Resources Institute. Ross and I have been talking about this case study a bit, and it's unfortunate that we have so little time for him to present it because there's a lot of complexity to it, and I think we could spend a whole session on just this and digging into some of these different issues around the social component of it in particular. So I just want to ask a few questions digging into that, and then hopefully that will spark some other questions, knowing that we're not covering everything. So hopefully you'll have a chance to talk to Ross about it afterwards. But I want to start getting into this approach that you have to working with women, because as you mentioned, you're working with 50% women as farmers, but it's a very patriarchal society where you're working. And I want to know what approach you've taken to engaging women and what you're hearing from both male and female farmers about the impact of this and how it might be changing social norms in positive or negative ways.
Yeah, great, thanks. So as I mentioned, for our payments, we're making a distinction between the landowner and the farmer, and this distinction goes all the way back to the contract that farmers sign to join this partnership. And in that partnership, we're clearly ascribing the Komaza farmer as the person who's going to be doing the work and as the person who's going to be paid by Komaza for the work done. At the same time, the landowner, if that's not the farmer, and I will say in most of the cases that is the farmer, if it's not the farmer, the landowner signs as a consenting party. So they only are consenting to allow the project to be done in their land, and we've not actually faced a significant challenge with having this occur. And I think an important point of clarification there is how we're actually recognizing who is the landowner and who is the farmer, and recognizing the land rights of the farmer. And we do this by pretty intensive engagement of local community leaders and local government administration. So in the context where we're operating, there's not a lot of formal documentation, there's not a lot of title deeds. So obviously we accept those where they're present, but in the vast majority of cases we have to use these external channels to determine this land ownership. And so we're engaging those local leaders, as I mentioned, and actually in the vast majority of cases we're seeing that the community leaders are recognizing women as having rights to those lands, which is really exciting. And so for us, that's caused a situation where in most of our cases, women farmers are recognized as the occupiers or owners of that land. So they do not have to have an external landowner, be that their husband or another male family member or anyone else, sign that contract. They're able to sign it themselves and participate in this partnership freely. In the few cases where the ownership of or occupation of the land is not recognized as the woman, in 90% of those, it's recognized as a direct family member, often a male, vast majority of cases. But we've actually seen that there hasn't been a significant amount of trouble in actually making sure that the man consents to letting the partnership take place. I could go into a bit more depth, but I think we have a few more questions to get to, so thank you.
You had mentioned that in the one place you're working now that hasn't been an issue, but you're moving into another area where it's a little more traditional. Women's roles are stricter, more strictly enforced. And so could you speak to how you're adjusting your approach to that context?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So the distinction there is Komaza has been operating in Kilifi County for the past 10 years. A lot of piloting, a lot of refining of our model to get to where we are now. And last year we recently expanded into Kwale County. And in Kwale County we're seeing a lot more patriarchal influence in the land ownership sphere. And so this question has, as we've approached this, we've seen that a lot of men will not want women, first of all, to participate, even speaking to the staff members that we have. And so I think what we've really done is approached women, and we've sensitized the families, so we've had a lot of engagement with the family members in actually making this decision. As part of our program model this year, we're taking a much more strict and direct approach to engaging the family member on the importance of allowing women to take part in this partnership. And we've actually seen significant successes in that. So we've sensitized we've sensitized some male community members, husbands of women who are interested in enrolling. And we've had a decent amount of success by training our field staffs to implement these programs.
So I know you haven't done an evaluation of this program yet. Could you, though, tell us if you're getting any feedback from your field staff or from people in the communities about the impact, and particularly both on this land issue, but also on the mobile money that you mentioned.
Yeah, that's a great one. And so, as I mentioned, we're using mobile money to pay farmers directly, with the idea being that women who engage in the project are able to see that money go directly to them and have more control over that than they might if they were getting that money in cash. And so, as I mentioned in my initial introduction, some of the questions that we have surround this sort of SIM card control and ownership. So it's completely the farmer, the enrolled farmer's choice to designate which phone or which SIM card receives that money. And we QC that with them actually a number of times to make sure that everything is correct. But in a case where a woman might own, a family might own only one phone or one SIM card, we're not 100% sure on those dynamics of control. So if, in that case, are men then taking that money, or are they using that money for their own purposes? And actually, we've gotten a lot of feedback from community members and from our field staff about sensitizing men. So we've had a lot of circumstances where we come to the payments, we have field staff in the field talking to farmers around these payments, checking to make sure that these numbers are all correct. And we have situations where men come and are actually trying to trying to get control of this money even though they didn't do the project. And again, we've had success sensitizing them as why it's important to allow the women to participate in, and sort of receive the benefits of the work that they're doing. And secondly, we've had a lot of feedback sessions that have given us ideas about how to refine our program model. One of the cool ones that I was just discussing with a number of field staff last week was around potentially providing SIM cards to women who don't have them. So if one of our farmers comes to us and says that they don't have a SIM card and they want one so that they can have more control over that money, then actually having us provide that to them as an additional service to make sure that they're actually benefiting from this partnership. And I think this is hugely important because we want this to be a successful and fulfilling partnership for everyone who partakes in it, so that people are re-enrolling and so that people are encouraging other people to enroll as we go forward, so that we can continue to grow and scale our business.
Thank you. I know you have more questions about this case, but we want to give the audience a chance to ask some clarifying questions as well. The common theme in all of these case studies is around what Marlene mentioned earlier. It's about the labor cost, who's going to be doing the work on restoration on each plot, on each individual plot, and then who gets the benefits. And we know these are gendered landscapes, that's not equal, and how do you prepare for it, how do you correct it, how do you adapt as you go on in the implementation of the projects. If anything that was just presented is not completely clear, is there a question from the audience for Komaza? Can you keep it brief, please, and ask a targeted question and introduce yourself as well? And keep it
My
brief,
name is
response.
Edmund Barrow. Two short questions. How do you choose the farmers you work with? And at the end of it all, who owns the trees and the rights to benefit from, dispose of? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So we have a pretty intensive enrollment program where we're enrolling farmers through our field staff. We're presenting information about how the partnership works, what the potential benefits of the partnership can be, both social and environmental, for the farmers and the communities with whom we work. And so it's an entirely opt-in, opt-out program. They have complete control to either engage in this project or not engage in this project. It's also important to note, and this is kind of getting into some of those details, that we're marking this as not a substitution for traditional subsistence farming, or not a substitution for other farming that's producing year-to-year income, but as an alternative savings mechanism to use land that might be not being used for more productive purposes if there's a constraint of labor, for example. And then the second question, sorry, what was? Benefits. Oh, benefits.
Who owns the trees and who has rights to dispose of the trees?
Yeah, so great question. So Komaza owns the trees through the partnership, but the farmers retain control of the land, ownership of the land, absolutely. And so for us, owning the trees is a way to protect our investment, but of course we're as invested as the farmers in ensuring that the outcome is good for both parties. I'm not sure what I mean by the disposal of the trees. Do you mean by harvest, or do you mean? Yeah, so then we're harvesting, so we're actually providing a guaranteed market so that we're buying all of the trees, we're paying for the trees, in a split with the farmer. So obviously each of us had some sort of an establishment cost. Komaza had operational costs, the farmer had opportunity costs, although no cash costs to join the partnership. And so then we're sharing that profit at the end.
All right, we'll have more time at the end to ask more questions. I want to ask the audience a provocative question. When you signed up and came here to the Global Landscape Forum, and you're coming here to learn or share lessons about restoration, this type of model that Komaza is doing, the outgrower scheme with smallholder farmers, are you convinced that this is a case of land restoration? Can I just see a show of hands? Do you feel like this is a clear case of land restoration? All right, so I think we need to explore this a little bit deeper, this issue, if this is what we're considering restoration. I'm not going to give you a chance to respond. I'm sorry. I purposely did that to get a provocative response. As I mentioned, I'm on the board of the Nairobi Water Fund. The Nairobi Water Fund is a scheme, a finance mechanism whereby a 10 million grant from the Global Environment Facility was provided to set up the Nairobi Water Fund to protect the area of the Upper Tana River watershed. This is an area that provides 90% of the water that is used in Nairobi, and obviously it's very important for businesses, industries, and of course the Nairobi population of 4 million people. 5 million people live in the Upper Tana watershed. It is almost entirely agricultural land except for perhaps the Aberdares National Park. I just wanted to give that quick introduction so that we can almost go right into the interrogation by our colleagues at the end, Edna and Caro. Please introduce yourself. We agreed ahead of time that I would not be doing the introductions and that the interviews would be doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravik. My name is Edna Wangui. I am a researcher, associate professor at Ohio University in the Department of Geography. And we agreed earlier that we were going to go straight into a question and answer session because my colleague, Caro, who's going to introduce herself more properly than just me saying her first name, has a lot of interesting, she's really at the grassroots, and I think she has a lot of interesting things to say and that we can all really, the researchers in the room, I noted by a show of hands at the beginning, there are a lot of researchers in the room that we can learn from this grassroots experience. So Caro, tell us your name and title and maybe a little bit about the day-to-day activities that you are involved in your job.
My name is Caroline Wangari Nguru. I'm an extension agent working with the Nairobi Water Fund, but from the county government. My daily activity involves visiting farmers, and of course I use my tour of trade. We use the motorbike going to see the farmers. And one of the things that we do when you go to see the farmers, because every extension agent is supposed to see 2 farmers per day, is to make sure that you draw a farm plan, that you help the farmers to implement the activities that are going to restore his area, his farm. And most of the activities that we do there is, we do the terracing, we raise the terrace, we raise the water pan. As you can see, that is the water pan at the farmer's farm. We also make sure that we raise the grass strips. We also make sure that we do a lot of activity. We advise on the agroforestry and the landscape. And of course, after rain, we move and we expect the farmer to implement the activities and come back later and see how much activity he has done. And of course, after you find that you have excavated the water pan, as you can see, the water fund provides the liner so that he can store the water. And most of the water that you can see here is from the roof or road runoff, because we also do dirty road management.
Thank you very much, Caro. Just listening to you talk, I'm curious as to how you decide who to engage. Say you have arrived at the farm state, and I'm thinking more about the gender dimensions of some of the work that you do. How do you decide who to engage in that?
When you go to the farm, you have to identify who is the decision maker in the farm. But mostly in our case, when you go, sorry for that. When you go to the farm, you have to identify who is the key decision maker in the farm. And of course, when you go there, sometimes you may find that the man in the house, who are the majority of the decision maker, are not there. Sometimes you may decide to talk to the lady in the home, because the man, sometimes you are not able to go to find him. But mostly it's good to talk with the decision maker who would make most of the decision.
Thank you very much. If I could talk also a little bit about the research that we did with the Nairobi. We were, as Carol has pointed out, they have a suite of strategic sustainable land management practices that are geared towards soil and water conservation. Our take in the project was to really look at how gender influences men and women's participation in the Nairobi Waterfront activities, who benefits from the list of strategies that they are introducing to the farmers. And in a lot of ways, based on how we carried out the fieldwork, Carol and I were really a lot like research partners. And I would like her to talk a little bit, you, Carol, to talk a little bit about the lessons learned from working together as research partner. What did you learn, and how did that information influence your work moving forward?
I must say that the research was interesting because it gave us some gender lenses. It helped us to, as an implementer, I became a better implementer because I realized that each activity that we are doing in the farm, different people are benefiting from it, and different people make decisions pertaining to it. Like, for example, in the watershed, when you come to the agroforestry, it's the men who decide where the trees to be planted. So even if you talk to the lady of the house, and he's not the main decision maker, especially for male-headed household, you find that even if you give the trees, those trees will not be planted. When you come to things like soil conservation, women are the ones who persuade the men to give them money to do the soil conservation. So women play a big role in soil conservation. When I'm talking about soil conservation, I'm talking about the laying of grass strips and terraces. When you come to the riparian protection, we have to convince the women, because that's why they do most of the farming. Because in our watershed, you find that the riparian area, that's where people do a lot of farming, is meant for the women and the youth. So if you're not able to convince them, they will not move from there. So after this research, we're able to use a different approach in a way that you're not using a blanket approach to every activity that you are doing. The other thing that we did is that we realized that us not considering gender was one of the reasons why the adoption date is a bit low. So from that discussion, we were able to implement some gender strategy, like making sure that the cost sharing for women-headed household is a bit lower, because in our project is what the community contribute for the activity, especially for the for the dam liners.
Well, thank you very much. And moving forward, this is actually question that I'm always really very curious about. When I've gone to a field to do research, and there are people really at the grassroots who already understand what I'm trying to get to more than they are. What would you wish that people from outside coming to the places that you work would understand about gender before they start their work?
That when you consider gender issues and have proper gender strategy, that is, you can succeed in your project. But if you don't take into consideration from the start, you are likely to fail.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, both. Can I wonder especially for those of you who live in Nairobi, you've experienced the water shortages. We know we've gone through a period of sometimes having to buy water in water trucks. How many of you who live in Nairobi are familiar, have heard of the Nairobi Waterfront? I'm just curious, is this, so this is really not quite well known. I know the Nature Conservancy is raising his hand because it's they're the main manager of the fund. Please, if you have a question for Edna or Caro, Can I see a hand? I will allow 2 questions in this case because this gentleman is a farmer and you raised your hand first. Please be gentle with Carol. She left her house at 5:30 in the morning to come here. So if you have a question, please be gentle with her. Please go ahead first and I'll take both questions right away.
Yeah, thank you for that. I've seen quite a lot of debate online about the Nairobi Water Fund and quite a lot of critique, and I really don't understand it, to be quite honest, what the project is. But the critiques around the Nairobi Water Fund is that this is just another corporate takeover of public resources. And I've seen mentions of corporates like the Coca-Cola Company and the East African breweries. Could you please speak to those kinds of critiques? That's the dominant discourse around the critique around the Nairobi Water Fund.
Thank you. And your name is?
My name is Kendi Borona.
From?
I'm representing myself.
Thank you. Nice question. Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Gerard Gatia. I work with the National Alliance of Community Forest Associations in the country. I'm a farmer from Nyeri. But one thing I've never heard about Nairobi Waterford. All I know is that Nairobi has been getting a lot of water from the Aberdares, and there has been a lot of complaints from our farmers that nothing is pumped back for environmental conservation. I've seen the water pumps, and I've heard that farmers contribute to the Rhinos. I don't know why the Waterford does not give the Rhinos and even assist in that flood water harvesting. I also don't see why the farmers themselves have got to do the terracing without being given incentives by Nairobi Water Company, which gets a lot of money out of that conservation. Farmers in Muranga and other farmers, including myself, who give water to the Tana River, get nothing from the waters that flow into the towns and even into the hydroelectric production. So there's a big concern, and something has to be done for sustainability of the water supply in this country.
Let me, before giving Cara that question, from my perspective, I'll give my perspective. I'm not part of TNC. I am, as a technical partner on the board of the Nairobi Water Fund. We know that cities are running out of water. Cape Town is one example this year. We know that we need to protect the watersheds. But the people who are managing those watersheds, those are the landowners, they need to be incentivized one way or another. We're having this session because we understand that when you restore, different people do the work and others are benefiting. And in this case, you might argue that the farmers are doing all the work and people in Nairobi are benefiting, including Coca-Cola and East Africa breweries. I think it's a bit more complex than that. When farmers are guided, are giving advice on how to put in terraces, they're given grass seedlings, which are also forages used for cattle feed. The water pan liners, indeed, it's co-payment. It's not given for free. The farmers are asked to do some of the work, and then most of it is paid for by the water fund. The example that Caro gave is that female-headed household, we found through our research, are especially burdened to dig the pans for the pan liners, so the cost for them has been reduced. And there's a whole range of sustainable land management options that are provided to the farmers. But in terms of the actual benefits, we had an interesting discussion. I'm going to ask Cara to discuss this. In terms of the real benefits for the farmers, because we know that they don't necessarily are concerned about the big picture or about Nairobi. They're concerned about their livelihoods on their farm and increasing their productivity. Can you tell us a little bit about the actual impacts for farmers from some of these interventions, considering that you have now rolled out interventions with, I believe, 1,500 farmers already, and you're continuing to do this work?
I'll say when you when you look at what farmers are getting from this, is a real benefit, economic benefit that they are getting from that. Because what happened is that when you look at the Rainer, like for example, this one that we are providing here, is supposed to hold 100,000 liters of water. And these 100,000 liters of water, the farmer is supposed to use it during the dry season, 1 month before the rains. And this farmer is able to get into the market when there's no more production. People are not producing a lot. So we have seen farmers who are able even to buy cars, they're able to take their children to better school, because the farmer is not interested on the issue about how clean water that we are delivering to Nairobi. The Rainer is just one activity that we tell the farmer must contribute for sustainability. The other things that we give them for free, like for example, the technical advice, we give the agroforestry trees for free. So meaning that in one season, we can be investing even 30,000 in that farm, especially the avocado trees, the fruit trees. So this Rainer thing about charging them 15% or 30% is for sustainability, because we tried to give them for free, and what we learned later is that some of them were not taking care of it. So it's because it's something that we have run over time to make sure that we have the sustainability. Yeah.
Thank you. And to the lady in the back, I'm sorry we didn't get to quite answer your question. I'd love to be able to explain more about how the financial mechanism works, but we're running out of time for this session right now. Perhaps there will be another question in the panel part to discuss this. And I'll hand it over now to VIA Agroforestry to please introduce yourself and tell us about the case study. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Catherine Manchester with the Program on Forest, which is hosted by the World Bank. And I have the pleasure today of speaking with Wangu Mutua, the Deputy Regional Director for VIA Agroforestry. And I'll let her give you more details about that project.
Yep. Maybe I start by introducing who VIA Agroforestry is. It's a Swedish organization that has been working in East Africa since 1983 and currently working in Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, and Tanzania. There are several projects and programs that are implemented by the organization, but for the case in point today, we will dwell mostly on one of the carbon projects that we have piloted with the World Bank in Western Kenya. And the project somehow carries with it the agroforestry message that we have promoted since 1983, but for this case in point, we moved into an area we had not worked before, and with it also came along with a sustainable agricultural land management promotion of the take-up of the practices. And the idea was to move into the community promoting the practices because they are good for all of us, but at the same time, we were tracking, or we continue to track carbon in the take-up of these practices. And what has been the issue at the design stage, at the implementation phase, was the land question, the land ownership question. Who has the right to commit a certain space of land for taking up of some of the practices that we were promoting? And some of the elements that have been mentioned here already, of the women being the ones working in the farms, and the owners or the title holders of the land being the men within the family. These are some of the challenges we also faced when out there. And of course, with the carbon projects, the issue of ownership of the carbon rights becomes key. And if we went on and demanded that for you to join in the project, you must have a title deed, we would have lost quite a significant number of potential participants in the project. So what we did was go in with the community, checking in, is there the rightful authority to work on the specific space of land if the ownership is within the family, for example. So this allowed us to be able to bring on board many women to participate into the project who would otherwise have been locked out. But before I get lost into my stories, then I let my...
Thank you, Wangu. The ultimate goal of increasing women's participation in these programs is, of course, their empowerment and better outcomes for these programs. Can you speak a little bit about how VI Agroforestry is measuring empowerment indicators and what trends you're seeing through your projects?
One of the ways we are tracking women participation is the leadership space that women are taking in the farm organizations, because the setup of our implementation currently is that we work with farmer member-based organizations, and within them they have the leadership structure. So more often than not, you might find that women don't have as much space in the leadership or where decisions are being made in these spaces. So one of the indicators we are tracking is the leadership positions that have been taken up by women in the organizations that we are supporting. Also, things like them having gender policies within the organizations, having gender committees within the organizations. At the same time, also tracking how, or at the design stage, how the activities or the actions that are being prioritized, to whom are they of most benefit. You might find that maybe trees being a permanent structure on the land that is owned by, mostly in the patriarchal society we have in this region, owned by the man, then might be very interesting, which can be good for us because we are promoting agroforestry. But at the same time, there is the issue of, the food productivity, the increase in the nutrition and these kind of things, which are also important. So for us, it's important to look at the bigger picture, the whole picture. So you don't just get lost or get excited by one dimension of looking at things, but you have to look at the context and the bigger picture of what is happening.
Thank you very much. And in that larger context, how important is it in your projects to choose the right technology, the right tree species, so that women and men benefit equitably from the benefits of sustainable agriculture or agroforestry projects?
It is crucial, it is very important, because probably when you're designing your actions or programs, you might think this is quite interesting because it has worked in somewhere else, but when you come down, you might find that maybe whatever it is that you're trying to promote is not working, or is not working as much as you would have thought. Case in point, if, for example, the time element, for instance. Some practices might be very good, but they might end up taking more time and meaning more, the women who are mostly, in more cases than not, working in the farms, having to allocate much more time, especially if there is no relooking at the division of the work and who is taking on what kind of work. So the technologies you promote and the supporting systems in place need to go hand in hand. Simple things like energy-saving GCOs, for example. Of course, they are good for the environment, but at the same time, it's also a question of the time they release from time that would otherwise have been used to go collecting firewood and things like this. Things like right now we have what we call MSALM app, that it's a very simple application that we are using. The community facilitators are able to penetrate into the villages without having additional costing of printing bulky materials, but accessing the information very easily. The techniques, in short to say, the techniques are crucial. They're very important in deciding or in helping you realize what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I'd like to ask you a little bit more about one tool in particular, which VI Agroforestry has developed and that's your roadmap for decision-making within households. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how the results from that tool?
Yeah, like it has been mentioned by the other panelists here, one thing we have seen is in a patriarchal system, decision-making is key. And the person you're talking to, like the lady from Nairobi Waterfund was mentioning, that is, if you're talking to the person who does not have the power to make the decision, then you hit a wall. So what we realize is by having a way that you can engage a household to do sort of a vision planning for the house, and they come up with a household roadmap. So we have this household roadmap tool that brings all the members of a household, whether it's the man, the woman, the children, everyone, and they ask, reflect and ask themselves where do they want to be in a certain period of time. So together they agree on where they want to go. And once they have had that discussion at the beginning, then it becomes very easy. So if tomorrow, say, the man is in the city doing some job or looking for some job for some reason, and the woman and the children are at home and they get a training on a certain practice, then since it's already within their map, they had already agreed on this, it becomes very easy with taking up, and it also encourages in that involvement in making the decisions for the household at home. We have seen quite huge success in this. It's very popular with among the communities that we have introduced this in. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have so many questions about that tool, but I think we're running out of time, so I'll hand it over.
Yes, I apologize for that. We were a bit ambitious with planning this session. Is there a clarifying question from the audience? I'm just, this gentleman right here. Can you please say your name and who you're with?
Hello. Yeah, I'm HRH Stephen Izakari from Uganda, a traditional leader of the Madi people. Mine is not to you, to either of you. Mine just goes to the Komaza's gentleman.
I'm sorry, we have a certain format, and can you keep your question to the panel section, because we really want to see if this case can be, if there's a clarifying question, and we're going to have a panel, and there will be 20 minutes for questions at the end.
Okay, I'll stop.
Is there a question for VIA Agroforestry? There was a lady back there, a hand. Please go ahead.
My question is in regard to the decision making. Most of the farmers you deal with operate in a patriarchal background. When in a patriarchal background, chances are these female farmers face male backlash. How do you equip them to deal with that?
Yeah, like I said, you rightly put it. Backlash is a huge problem. What we have done in our programming is that we don't, when we go into the community, we do not isolate and just work with women alone, but we work also with the men to understand why is it important to look into every group within the society. It's the men, it's the women, it's the old, it's the young, it's the youth. So each of them, they have their own issues that they're dealing with, and at the beginning we bring everyone together and try to understand what are the vulnerabilities that we face and how are we affected differently. Maybe how I'm affected as a woman in a certain situation might be different from even how another woman in a different setup might be affected by some of these issues. So we work a lot with trying to bring in that understanding of the situation and the dynamics at play. We also try to work a lot with male champions also, who sort of, try to take on the message. So we do not sort of isolate the women and work with them only. Yeah. Thank
you all. I just want to thank you all for your courage to come and share these projects. These projects are well-intended, often imperfect, and we try to improve them along the way. And sometimes we fail, we learn, and we continue to try to improve them. These projects were all quite different. I mean, they have some similarities in terms of how the workload is shared and who gets the benefits, and we try to, at least we've seen examples of how to improve them. But in terms of financing, for example, they're all quite different. I know Komaza is a private investors, really complicated and complex to set up a model like that where you can attract investors who will be happy with the returns that you promise. Private partnerships, private-public partnerships. There's a lot of, what's the word? Sometimes negative connotations that can come with those, and you have to figure out how to deal with those. But in the end, you're trying to figure out how to empower the smallholder farmers and give voice to them. And with Viagroforestry, you're including a carbon scheme with individual trees on farm plots, and these are complex situations. So I just want to quickly thank you all for your courage for coming to share these stories with us, and I will ask the panelists to come up. Please help me give them a hand of applause. The panelists we have today. First, I would like to invite Cécile Jubet. Cécile is the head of, she's an agronomist and a social forester, and she's the head of the African Women Network for Community Management of Forests. Cécile, welcome. The second person is Solange Bandiaki Baji. Solange is the director for Africa and Gender Justice Program with the Rights and Resources Institute. We have a third panelist. I'm not sure if Janet is here. Janet Macharia? Okay, so as part of Janet's program, we're very thankful that Siam Drisi is going to take her spot and help us answer some questions and put the context in this. You're the Program Management Officer with UN Environment. I will ask one question to each of the panelists, and then we'll open the floor, and I'll make sure that you get to ask a question as well. Let me start with Cécile. The common thread that we've seen in all of these cases is, again, this problem where you design projects as best as possible, as equitable as possible, but you see it's never quite equal. You see often a greater burden on women to do the work. In the case of Komaza, the women often manage the trees, but then might not get all the benefits, and so Komaza did a correction in their payment system to be able to ensure that women got those. Beyond Kenya, we've seen 3 cases of Kenya, but of course this is not a conference on Kenya only. Beyond Kenya, can you share with us your experiences in your work where you can better plan projects and better gender correct projects during the implementation phase, and what we've learned from this and what we can take home from this session?
Thank you. I think that as we shared with the case study and in my own experiences, if we usually fail, it's also because the starting point is not that well done. We need to start with the gender analysis. The gender analysis helps us to understand what, who, how, and for what, which effect. Is very, very important to start with the gender analysis. And most of the time, we forget about that. That's first. The second is the culture. The cultural aspect is very, very important. So we need to make sure that we involve men at the very early stage, as well as we involve the women. We have to involve men, because if not, the women are taken in the isolation, and it cannot make any effect on any impact on what we are looking for. So it's very important when we are working, when we are building up a project, we start with a gender analysis to understand, and then we put in place activities that will engage the men, because the men have to be in support of what the women will be doing. If not, we are more likely to fail. The third one is usually we don't know that women are also part of the problem. So we also need to understand what is lacking for them to take fully part on the implementation. We have to make sure they have the capacities. We have to make sure they have the resources. The time is very important. The financial resources is very important. And then most of the issues are linked to the security for their rights, the tenure issues. I was like a little bit, how can we work on the land? Women work on land, and the ownership of trees is for the men. It's something that it's difficult to understand. We need to make sure that even if we are building the partnership, we make sure we have secured the piece of land to those women who will be involved in planting trees or in evaluating that piece of land. So I think what we miss usually is that the women traditionally, culturally, they don't own land, they don't own forest. We start from there. How can we improve that? How can we take in men to understand the added value of having women in a specific program for sustainability, for success, for themselves and for the communities. When that is lacking, we are more likely to fail. And you know, social changes, the social change is also has to do with transforming the dynamics and building capacity, leadership capacities, technical capacities of both men and women. So the gender issues is key in all these projects. Thank you so much.
Thank you. A lot packed into your statement. I wish to have some follow-up questions, but I'm going to move on so we have some time for the audience again. To Solange, again, we're going from the case studies to now a more general perspective outside of the case studies in Kenya. The first question was more of a normative one, and this one is more of a sort of an instrumental sort of approach to designing restoration projects. There is a case to be made that if you don't consider gender, it is a loss. But you can also look at it from an opportunity. By properly considering gender, you have far greater success for these projects, especially in light of the amount of money that's about to be spent or being spent on restoration projects. The LDN fund alone has $300 million that is dedicated to global land restoration. How do we change this message from more of a here's a problem that you need to address, and if you don't, right, there's something bad happening, to one that is, here's an opportunity. It's an opportunity cost if you don't. And so these projects must have this because you can achieve your goals more efficiently, and they're more sustainable in the long run. What are we learning about this in general?
All right. Thank you for the question. What I would like first to say is that both restoration and gender are social constructs. And I think if we understanding from that perspective, that will help us move beyond the technical aspect of restoration. And when I say that conservation and gender are both social constructs, it's because, like, in a sense that men and women within the communities, they should own the process of restoration of any program that is in there. So when I say own the process, meaning that there should be effective participation and representation of both men and women into decision-making processes, but also that they should own their resources, the land, the forest, and the water resources. And that ownership of the process and of the resources, to me, are the key, that will make restoration programs work. Another aspect, and maybe before I go to the other aspect, what really struck me about that first case study, like Cecil mentioned, that women, they own the land, but they don't own the tree. But for me, I was saying, well, women are the landowners, but at the same time, they are the laborer. They have been used as labor. Instead of them who own the land could be the one hiring other people to do the work for them so they can take the money. So that's, I think it's a kind of a proletarian approach that we really need to think about. How do we make sure that the owners, the communities, the women, men within the community, who are the owners to be really the tree owners, and and should be able to get the benefit out of it. The other one is that restoration should be based on a right-based approach. And in that sense is that we need to recognize the rights of, like, communities. When I say communities, men, women, indigenous communities, rural women, to make sure that those resources, their access to the resources are seen as a human right aspect, as a human right issue. Then in that way also, that will really help move the restoration aspect to another level. And the best way also to incentivize, my question is, because we talked about, well, we incentivize them, but the best way to incentivize to me is to recognize and respect their rights to the resources. Because once you do that, then, that's the best incentive that you could get. And the other aspect that I want last to bring in is that I think we focused a lot on we talked about agroforestry. The agricultural part is that what I heard a lot about here. But how about the forestry aspect? Because restoration is not only about, doing agroforestry, but again, when you go to the forest, where the communities are the one conserving the forest, where they are the one who are really making sure that the forest is really used in a very sustainable way. So how do you make sure that also restoration could look into that kind of approach of forestry? And I think I'll leave it there because Marcus is telling me that I have one more minute.
No, thank you very much. So you mentioned a lot of the challenges around ownerships. In this case, with the 3 case studies we've seen, it's ownership of water, it's ownership of land and trees, and it's ownership of ecosystem services such as carbon, and that often become problematic when you try to look at benefit sharing. But you also start getting into more fuzzy terms of social constructs. My last question is for Siam, and it's a bit of an unfair question. I have to warn you. The question is, are we making progress? Are we making enough progress? Given that there's a lot of gender mainstreaming, we've been talking about this for a couple of decades now. The SDGs are strong on this topic. There's even a Me Too movement that has really raised the level of awareness much greater about issues far beyond gender and restoration. Are we making progress? Are we approaching a tipping point that people understand the problem of gender, or even that gender is socially constructed, that restoration is socially constructed, that there's different ways of looking at it, and that we have to look at this from a human rights approach? Or is this more business as usual, what we're seeing, and we're not really making enough progress?
Thank you for this question. First of all, I would like to apologize on behalf of my colleague Janet Macharia, who is our gender expert, who could not make it at the last minute. So I'm sure when she will know about this question, she will be happy of missing this opportunity. But more seriously, well, I hope we are making progress, and I do think we are making progress. Actually, it's when we first recognize that there is a problem, that we are closer to the solution, I think. The reality, I think, is that we are also observing a male out-migration in most of the rural parts due to the research for job opportunities and economic opportunities. And we are already observing in many countries in the world, not only in Africa, what they call a feminization of agriculture. So I think that now it's up to us, all of us, to see how we can actually recognize this change of roles in, for example, the land management and natural resources management that is obvious to men and to women. and how we, like practitioners or people from the research world or the UN, can actually adapt these new responsibilities and take them into consideration, for example, when it comes to landscape planning. First of all, like, there's like a first question. And are we putting in place the right skills, like the right offer for skills and financial resources to actually, for example, to women to handle these new responsibilities that they are ending up because of this migration? So I think that, like, yes, we are progressing. The fact that we are asking ourselves, you know, like these questions, but like I will return these questions to actually the audience, and like if they can also like give us examples of, you know, like how do they take, for example, we heard before from Carol, also the fact that like now extension services are involving more women is already a progress. Like traditionally it was a male story, like this extension services. So also having also female providing these services to other women farmers is already, you know, like a progress that has been made in the last years. So I'm sure people have here like a lot of good examples actually of recognition of this change in gender responsibilities. So I will be actually more curious about hearing from them. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. We are making progress. We are approaching a tipping point. We haven't passed it yet, and we cannot miss this opportunity that the global attention that is focusing now on restoration and all the money that's going towards restoration, we cannot afford to miss this opportunity. Luckily, we have a lot of experience. We just have 9 case studies printed back there of how we have improved restoration projects, and obviously we're well positioned, but the risk is not over, so we're well prepared. I'll take 3 questions, actually, aside from the question from the gentleman from Uganda. I'll take 2 more questions, and then we'll see if we can have another round. We have one over there and one over there. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, my name's His Royal Highness Drani Stephen Zakari, traditional leader of the Madi. That's a tribe in northern Uganda, northeastern Uganda. Thank you so much for all your presentations and stuff like that. It's been good and very enlightening. There's something that I kind of struggle, and with my people I try to explain it to them, and they do understand it when you explain it in the local language. The gender thing, I think, has been misunderstood and misquoted in many ways, because the socially constructed things about what men do and what women do are not, a man doing his thing, a woman doing his thing is not the same as a family doing their thing together. You understand? That is a man on his own, that's a woman on his own. A family is something different. And when you bring a communication in a family, it's a communication issue. And when a man takes the money or the benefits of something away from a woman, that is bad manners. You understand me? Culturally, it's bad manners. And when a man beats a woman because of something like that, that is a man who has problems, psychological and other things, and needs attention. Many a times, many men around him, they might be scared, or maybe they would like to do the same thing, so they condone the thing, so it becomes a cultural issue that that's a man, but it's not so. It's not cultural, it's not traditional, it's bad behavior, it's bad manners. That's that one done. And so men and women need to work together and respect each other, love one another, communicate better and stuff like that. I think then the gender roles, the real protection. In our tribe, when we are going somewhere, when we are moving or when we are doing something, the women are in the middle. Simply because the men mostly would throw a spear faster, farther, and more powerfully. And so they are mostly protected, and then the women then protect the children. So it's like...
Your Highness, do you have a question also?
Okay, that one is that one, right? The next one, mine was kind of the next one.
Just one question, please.
Going to Komaza. I'm a traditional leader, I'm an African. I'm on a forum of traditional authorities. That's an African Union thing. What I just want to say, to me, in the house, me, Drani Stephen, does not look, I think you're being used to work in a place, because land, trees take a long time to grow. It can take 50 years, 60 years, and something like that. And the people who signed, the people I saw, about 50 years old. Now, the trees don't belong to the landowner because he's not signed. And now, if those people die before the trees come, won't they be paid just for the work they have done? Because even a slave has to eat. So the work they have done, they are being paid for. And then the rest of the work, the trees belong to that owner. If those children grow up knowing they are not going to get benefit, what would happen?
Is the question clear?
What would happen
to respond to this? I respectfully ask you to let us give the other attendees to ask a question as well. Thank you for your question. There was one back there and one on the left.
Okay, my name is Caroline Uko. I'm a researcher with CETRAD. My question is, the 3 case studies we had were from Kenya. And how is their restoration efforts contributing to the agenda of the 5.1 million set aside for rehabilitation? Okay, and for the Komaza, do you work with the county government? What are the arrangements? Thank you.
Your question refers to the AFR 100 commitments that Kenya has made to restore 100 million hectares in Africa. I'm not sure if 5.1 million, yeah. I'll give you an opportunity to answer that, but I'm not sure if you're not part of the program and you're not working in Kenya on this. One last question.
My name is Betty Rono. I'm from Kenya and I'm in the field of academia. Now, I have a very simple question, not to the presenters and as well to all of us. I am looking for a day when we come here or we come to any meeting and we say, this is what is happening. We use the word is other than should. Because who are we directing the should to? Is it the researcher? Is it the project manager or the project initiator? For example, the Komaza, I'll use an example. You presented and say these are the women group. Already we are putting these people in a group. Already? See, when we go to the community, this is what they expect already. This is a thing for these people. This is a thing for the youth. This is a thing for the women. The rest are already pulling back. So I'm looking for a day when we sit down and we say this is what is, rather than should.
Thank you. Do you want to, any of the panelists want to respond to any of the questions? Okay, so I'll give Komaza a chance to answer mine and the other question that was asked. I have a timer here put for you. I'm going to click it when you come to the podium. You have 2 minutes.
Thanks. So to briefly answer, I think there's a lot of questions there. One, to answer the first question that was asked, we have a co-signee that signs the contract with the farmer. That's chosen by the farmer, often a child, often a relative. That's the person who inherits the payments in case of the farmer's death. Obviously, the photo you saw is older people. We have a lot of older farmers. A lot of them do this as an investment for their children and for their children's education because it is a long-term project, and they see that, and then they opt into the project based on that. To respond to the question about whether Komaza actually is working to restore land, I think it absolutely is, and it's absolutely doing so sustainably. We planted 3 million trees. We have 3,800 hectares of woodlots that were not there before in an area that is now degraded dry land that used to be part of a contiguous forest that stretched from Kenya to Mozambique. And yes, we harvest those trees, but we also replant. Furthermore, by providing a sustainable source of wood products, we're preventing illegal harvesting of woodlands that do exist by providing a legal means for sustainable charcoal and for sustainable wood production. I would just like a little clarification for the comment there. You said should versus is. We are paying women directly with M-Pesa. We have improvements, of course, that can be made to that, but I'm curious a little bit if that could be clarified.
Sorry, I heard that you are paying the women. See, that's my concern is the group already. That's my concern, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was, we were paying everyone, obviously. I was focusing on the women as that was something that we learned, is that we were operating in a context that was traditionally patriarchal, where men were controlling the income, and that was frustrating women, that was frustrating our partners, and so we modified the program model to make sure that we were equitably distributing that to everyone. And sorry if that wasn't clear in the initial presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
And By the way, I'm a believer as well, and I think about, from what I remember, about 40% of the audience is a believer. I think the concern is not just the outgrower scheme, but it's when you do take care of the rights of those benefits that come in these examples in terms of water, land, and ecosystems, who, you have to take care of those, and you have to make sure it's inclusive and equitable. So it's not a yes or no, but thank you. We have time for one more round, 3 more questions. 1, 2, 3. We have 2 questions over here and 1 over there. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Tekla Chumba from Kenya. Mine is just an observation that I can say change does not come easily. Women, we are facing some challenges, though the law and the policies allow women to maybe to lead, but when it comes to organizations, men still dominate women. That we are given maybe to become the treasurers on the organizations. Again, at home, we do a lot, as somebody said, but when it comes to benefits, in some cultures, women are children. For an example, or unfortunately, when the man dies, if you have a lot of trees on the farm and they are ready to be sold, a woman is not allowed to sell the trees, but the family members will sell the trees, but the lady will not benefit from the money. We have a case where a woman became sick and her husband died, and there were trees which were supposed to be sold so that the lady can go to the hospital. But because of the family and the hatred, they refused to sell the trees for the lady, and the lady passed on, and the trees are still there standing. So I don't know whether other countries women are facing the same challenges, but here in Kenya, we are saying change does not come easily. It will carry some people's life before it is felt. Thank you.
I'm Frida Munyi from Kemfree, Mombasa. My question goes to Komaza, and it's in regards to the project and sustainability issues. We've been having a lot of problems in the coast, whereby there's a lot of dependency syndrome along the coastline. So what are you doing, given a scenario whereby you're not there? So what happens? Are there structures to ensure that the same is continued, especially when you're dealing with the market systems? Thank you.
I have 2 questions. The first is to Komaza. My name is Nancy Mwangi. I work with the National Gender and Equality Commission. Are there any mechanisms you put in place to assist women who want to transition from being farmers to landowners? I mean, when there are opportunities to buy a piece of land, are there any mechanisms you have in place to assist women, whether it's to assist the farmers you work with to transition into landowners? My second question is general. One of the panelists mentioned that restoration should be based on a rights-based approach. What initiatives have been put in place to educate these women on their rights? Because you will not, in many instances, many of these women do not have access to education. Are there programs that are put in place to educate them about their rights so that they have the knowledge from the very beginning?
Okay, I'm going to give the panel a chance to answer. Slightly rephrase your first question and yours as well. What happens when restoration projects have unintended consequences? We've talked about violence in the household because suddenly there are more benefits, there's more money. And the question now comes, is it the responsibility of the project now to to correct for that? How do they do it? And especially, is this an opportunity for providing not just the benefits from the restoration, but to look far beyond this in an empowerment of women, finding jobs outside of the home, outside of the restoration project, and is this basically an opportunity for far greater gender equality? If any of the panelists want to answer this.
Thank you. I think, as we all know, restoration should go beyond trees, planting trees. Restoration should be supported with livelihood development, because those who are, this joins what the chief was saying. Those who are involved in the restoration program or project, this is a long-term activity. This is a long-term commitment. And it's very important to make sure that those who have done that got benefit from what they have been doing. So it's not only planting trees, or is not for climate only, or for biodiversity only. It's also for right security, is also for livelihood development, is also for leadership capacities, is also for decision-making access for the women. And when it's seen like that, then we are more, people are more, or women or local communities are more engaged into that. And it's what the lady was saying is not only in Kenya, it's everywhere, where women do not own land, they don't own trees, and when the man passes away, in most of the countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, is the family, the family from the men, and male members of those families who benefit, who take care of everything. And this is also what we have to challenge and to work to try to arrange that. And that's where we have to work with men. In some of our countries, we have experiences where we are working with traditional chiefs to make them understand what in the values and culture we are doing, as the chief was saying, what is good and what is bad, and how can we support them in transforming those which are bad towards a better world, towards gender equality. So please don't understand restoration like only planting trees. It has to go with many other issues. Most of them are to improve the living condition of the population which are engaged into that.
Thank you, Cecile. Thank you. Solange, the hundreds of millions of dollars that will be spent on restoration, is this a threat to reinforcing existing inequalities, or is this an opportunity that we have a responsibility to correct those gender biases?
I think it's an opportunity, and it depends on how we use restoration, not to perpetuate or reinforce practices that already within the community, contribute to those inequalities. So it's just first one thing. The other thing is the issue of ownership. How do we make sure that the communities, both men and women, own the restoration process? Because if they don't own it, they won't see it as their own. So when I say about ownership here, I mean, for example, in rule making and planning, how do you make sure that the communities, both men and women, sit and decide about the rules and regulation and how to manage a restoration program? That's one thing. The other thing is about management. How do you use community-based rules to really manage the restoration program and not coming with exported way of managing a program? Then people don't fit within those rules and regulations. The other aspect is dispute resolutions. Within communities, people have their own way of dealing with conflict. How do you make sure that you build on those way of dealing with conflict, instead of, for example, bringing some external or court type of dealing with conflict resolutions? And enforcement, I mean, the communities themselves, they have way of really keeping people accountable to what it is. So it's all about how do you use the rules and regulation within the communities, their traditional way of doing. And last, what I want to say is that restoration should contribute to women's economic empowerment. And that comes back to what Cecilia was saying about how do we link restoration to livelihood.
Thank you. Thank you for ending on a nice positive note, bringing it back to a collective community restoration, institutions being clear on the rules, being clear on how rules can be analyzed by the community, how the rules can be changed, and institutions in general. I'm going to end it here to the lady that just asked the question about when are we going to stop talking about should and is. My question is, when are we going to stop having a gender session altogether at an event like this, because then we'll know we're there. And I'm going to finally ask one last question to my colleague Marlene. If there's one take-home question, a lot has been said here today, if there's one thing that you will remember after you take your flight back home or the weekend has passed from this session, it is...
Well, I would like to echo what the panelists said. I think they made some really excellent points, as did all the speakers. But maybe I'll come back to your question before about are we getting there? Are we making enough headway? Because I think we're doing something, but there's still a lot to do. As one of the participants said before, change doesn't come easily. I guess the question is, to what extent are we actually seeing changes in the structures that are maintaining inequalities? So some of the solutions or some of the approaches that are being used are maybe a little bit more technocratic. They're important. Mobile payments, for example, are important, and we can see that they are, it sounds like they're reaching people who would not otherwise necessarily have had a chance to have control over their income in that context. But we also, I think the issue of ownership of resources and of the process is extremely important. There are some more fundamental changes that we need to see. So changes with respect to ownership of land. And I think this is where restoration really offers a very exciting opportunity, actually, because it relates to that most fundamental resource that we have seen again and again really is so important to women's ability to make decisions and to have more voice within their households and within their communities. But of course, we're recognizing that processes take time. Not all changes necessarily can happen at the same time. So if we can recognize and celebrate the small successes, that's important, but keeping our eye on the ball and on the big picture and keeping us moving in that direction. So, yeah, and I think that the point also about, I know this is more than one take-home message, but about it being, it's not only about women, it's not about to pit women against men, it's really about seeing how these situations can create opportunities to enhance the livelihoods, the harmony, the social harmony, but maintaining and respecting basic human rights of everyone. So I think with that and with this sense of jointness and of moving together, engaging men, engaging women, engaging leaders and change agents together towards that common vision, I think that's a very exciting vision, and that hopefully we can all take that forward.
Thank you, Marlene. My take-home question is, message is, you cannot prepare enough for conflict with ownership of those benefits and ownership of those resources. We all the restoration projects forthcoming need to prepare, and even then we know there will be problems. So it's again about institutions, about making clear who gets to make changes to the rules and benefit sharing. Please help me give another applause to the panelists. We're only 8 minutes over time. Thank you all for your participation. Thanks to C4 and Marcus for helping organize this session, and for all the other organizations that helped organize this session.